My name's Ed Swaniak. Most of you know me at this point. And I'm very proud to be an integral part of the Institute of General Semantics. And as Neil Postman early on commented, media ecology is general semantics writ large. And so there's a long connection between the two organizations. Today's panel on a general semantics toolkit for sanity in today's political climate is obviously very topical, very much of relevance in this day and age, and especially since general semantics really does offer both theoretical as well as practical ways of thinking about how we can be a difference that makes a difference in the world, starting with how we look at the world differently from our perspectives using the tools of general semantics. The people on the front panel here are all very intimately involved with general semantics. We have Martin Levinson, who's the president of the Institute of General Semantics. I'm just going by the list down behind the slide here. Lance Strait next to him from Fordham University. Is a member of the Board of Trustees of the Institute of General Semantics, has been deeply involved with scholarly writing about as well as management of the Institute, and is also the president of the New York Society of General Semantics, for which I'll put the slide up in just a moment, or the website. Corey Anton is a professor at Grand Valley State University, also a member of the Board of Trustees of the Institute of General Semantics, and he too has written a lot on general semantics concepts, principles, theories. And lastly, Richard Fiordo has been a long-time contributor to etc., a long-time general semantics, and Richard comes to us from the University of North Dakota. I'm going to put up here just for a moment, we have a newly designed website for the Institute of General Semantics, and our primary publication is etc., Review of General Semantics. It was founded in the 40s by S.I. Hayakawa. Neil Postman was the editor of etc. for about 10 years. I'm very honored to be the current editor of etc. There's two ways you can publish your work within the field and scope of media ecology. The first is EAN, Explorations in Media Ecology. You have a handout about that in your packet, and we'll continue to remind you of, there's some chairs in the back here. We'll continue to remind people that if you're interested in getting your work published, you can submit it to EAN. The second vehicle for publication is etc., Review of General Semantics. And for that, you can there's a link on the IGS website for etc., or you can send them directly to me as well, any of your manuscripts or paper ideas. So the website is up here, and feel free to check that out at any point. We'll just turn this on. This is, again, the New York Society of General Semantics website, for which Lance will be talking about in a couple of minutes. So I'm just going to, with that brief introduction, just, again, reiterate what I started to say earlier, that in this day and age, general semantics really is possibly one of the ways that we can think about following that Buckminster Fuller quote, the world depended upon what I thought and what I did, what would I think and what would I do. It might start with some of the things that you'll be hearing over the course of the next hour or so. So we're going to begin with Marty Levinson, the president of the Institute of General Semantics.
Thank you. I have my shirt, tie, and suit jacket in my room. I haven't worn it since I've come here, so sorry. Anyway, before I start my talk, which I entitled Observations on the Apocalypse, a headline that I devised using Donald Trump's strategy of truthful hyperbole, I want to tell you about the corporate papers, which I told you if you were in the plenary, and it's in front of you, the corporate papers, so I won't bother telling you about it. You can read it. I also want to invite you to join the Institute of General Semantics. I won't tell you about that because you have the form in front of you, which I hope you will fill out and give to me by the end of the conference. By the way, when you join, in addition to being able to come to the AKML in New York free, you also get a subscription to EPC, a review of general semantics, and the editor who's over here. As a conference, you know, it's own review of publication. Okay, so let me begin my talk. This year marks the 100th anniversary of America's entry into World War I, a conflict that led to the deaths of billions of people and the birth of general semantics, a discipline that was formulated by Albert Korzybski, a Polish nobleman and engineer who served in the Great War. Korzybski noted that human technology keeps improving, but not so human relations. And so in 1933, he published his magnum opus, Science and Sanity, which laid out general semantics, a system designed to improve human evaluation so future wars could be avoided. This year also marks the 100th anniversary of the birth of John Fitzgerald Kennedy, a president who in his inaugural address said, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country," which is a far different approach that is being taken by our current president, whose mantra seems to be every man and woman for him or herself, and bring back the 1950s where jobs were plentiful, women had dinner on the table when men came home from work, minorities and gays knew their place, immigrants came here legally, people went to church, we liked Ike, and it doesn't get any better than that, so why wouldn't everybody want to make America great again? During the election, Trump said I could stand on Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody, and I wouldn't lose any voters, which meant in his mind that whatever he did, he had the support of his base, which seems, based on the results of the election, he did. His base also did not seem to mind whatever Trump and his spokespeople said. During the election, a Trump envoy, in response to a question about Trump changing his position on immigration, commented, "Trump hasn't changed his position on immigration. He has just changed the words that he's saying." His voters bought that argument, and so by and large has the Republican Congress, which has the power to make laws that affect our lives. This brings me to the general semantics formulation that meaning is not in words, it is in people. We are, in general semantics parlance, organisms as wholes in environments. In a nutshell, we do not respond to just words and reason. We are sensing, feeling, thinking, moving, doing creatures operating in complex physical and social environments. And we have, in the words of Albert Korzybski, semantic reactions to what is going on inside and around us. We do not act separately from our expectations, attitudes, beliefs, past experiences, how we talk to ourselves, and how others talk to us. We act with all those elements going on together in our internal and external environments. We identify with tribes. For example, in a political context, people may claim to be conservative or liberal. In terms of geography, urban, suburban, or rural. Religious identifications include Jewish, Christian, and Muslim. Gender, male, female, transgender, etc. Some people choose single issues to identify with. Pro-choice, pro-life, the Second Amendment, immigration, and base their votes and support for candidates and office holders accordingly. Other people want to throw the bums out and will support anyone who challenges the political status quo. A pox on both your houses, they cry as they throw up their middle finger and pull the lever for the anti-establishment candidate. Still other people hold strong feelings against certain groups, blacks, Muslims, Mexicans, and will vote for folks who are perceived to be fellow travelers. George Lakoff, a cognitive linguist based right here in California, talks about certain people having a strict father morality. That is, in a well-ordered world, there should be a moral hierarchy, and those who traditionally dominated should dominate. For instance, God above man, man above nature, God above man above nature, the disciplined, the strong above the undisciplined, the weak, the rich above the poor, employers above employees, Western cultures above other cultures, men above women, Christians above non-Christians, straights above gays. It has been postulated that we live in an era of post-truth politics, in which debate is framed largely by appeals to emotion disconnected from the details of policy, and by the repeated assertions of talking points to which factual rebuttals are ignored. This brings me to a cover story, which some of you may have seen, that appeared in the April 3rd edition of Time magazine. The heading of that story was, "Is Truth Dead?" A headline that was modeled on a Time cover story from the 1960s titled, "Is God Dead?" One of the purposes of the Is Truth Dead story was to point out the tremendous liberties that are being taken vis-a-vis truth by a certain politician and his minions in describing what is actually and factually going on in the world. Liberties that I suspect you can find right now on certain TV cable programs and social media sites that are more concerned with constructing narratives out of whole cloth than persuading people of the rectitude of their arguments by using evidence that can be verified, which is how general semantics and other science-based disciplines that privilege inquiry and disclosures of assumptions would prefer that people do it. Neil Postman presciently described more than 30 years ago in his book Amusing Ourselves to Death the shilling and showmanship that seem to be so prevalent in politics and in our culture currently. He argued that television, and if he had been writing today, I suspect he would have added the internet and social media, has reduced our ability to sit down and think our way through meaningful discourse. He contended that form excludes content. That is, a particular medium can only sustain a particular level of ideas. Many of us who were alive in 1985, when Postman first published Amusing Ourselves to Death, which had the subtitle Public Discourse in the Age of Show Business, thought things were looking grim on the political scene and avidly read Postman's book when it first came out. Who would have thought that the grimness that many of us felt during the Reagan era would be a grimness many of us now look for as we look back to the 80s as the good old days. Maybe 30 years from now, these will be the good old days. And Donald Trump will be considered just another lying, hateful, make-it-up-as-you-go politician who is better than some, but worse than others. I, for one, hope that's not the case, but rather hope that Trump proves to be an aberration with regard to the dominant factors of his philosophy that include the language of nihilism, the sense of crisis, the friend or foe mentality, the nostalgia for the past, and the unwillingness to comply with traditional political and social norms. Time will tell which scenario proves right, and in the interim, for those who would like to hear civil and at least quasi-truthful discourse in the public sphere, are worried about the direction in which the Republic is heading, and agree with the quote commonly attributed to Thomas Jefferson that an educated citizenry is a vital requisite for our survival as a free people, there is clearly work to be done in encouraging people to become more media literate. There is also work to be done in helping individuals to see the value of delaying their reactions and thinking carefully about what is being said in discussions over politics, and in promoting the usefulness of general semantics and media ecology to produce a better informed and more enlightened electorate. Thank you.
Thank you, Marty. Good way of starting this off. Next is Lance Fairbanks.
Well, hi. I don't have a formal talk, but first off, I wanted to mention we have a website for the New York Society for General Semantics. It's not as elaborate as the Institute of General Semantics website, but the reason it has this wild apricot thing up there in the URL is that there's something about me needing to buy a certificate for Google in order for it, or for web browsers, in order for it to not come up as suspicious. And I haven't gotten around to buying this certificate. There's nothing wrong with the website, but this way it doesn't. freak people out when they come to it through a search engine. But anyway, this is the links and resources page, and I wanted to just note a few things that are available. If you would, I have available, stop for a second, and there's a number of articles, including this one here, Politics 1984, that's entertainment, was published in Etc. in 1984 by Terence Moran, Neil Postman's colleague, and in fact, that informed the Postman's discussion of politics in Using Ourselves to Death. And there's also the Media Ecology, General Semantics in the Third Millennium was Neil Postman's AKML, Alfred Korzybski Memorial Lecture, where he famously said in a kind of exaggerated way that media ecology is general semantics writ large. And we also have videos. We've been doing these conversations and recording them. So, and that includes 2 sessions. You see political talk and political drama, part 1 and part 2. Part 1 was done in September, part 2 just a little bit, I think maybe a week before the actual election. And they include a number of people, mostly from the media ecology world, including Terry Moran. Actually, if we go to the home page, I think, or actually if you go up for a minute to news, I haven't gotten around to, and just scroll down a little, I haven't gotten around to putting them on those other links. There's the science fiction section that we had a panel on science fiction that Ed was in New York for, took part in, and the one before that, post-truth, no, just down there, alternate facts and fake news. These are all on YouTube too, so is also relevant for our discussion. And for those of you that are not familiar with general semantics, just to connect to Eric's talk previously, that's a question of sense perception, and in general semantics, you go back to we use our senses, and our senses have a certain structure to them, which means that we only take in part of what's out in the world, and what we take in and understand about the world has something to do with the structure of our senses, and in that way we build up an internal map of what the world is, which is subjective, but not in the completely relativistic postmodern sense, but rather in the scientific sense in which we understand that while we don't have direct access to reality, we create maps, and some maps are very good and get us where we want to go, and some maps are not so good. And some maps are completely bogus. And the idea is to improve our ability to map the territory. With that, and is the idea of abstracting, which means that what's out there, we take in information about what's out there, and that includes sense perception and also language. So the two are put under the same heading as part of a continuum of the same process of both pulling in information from the world and in a sense processing it and creating a sense of what's out there. So through perception, then through putting names on things and putting things into categories, we come to our understanding of the world with the idea that this can be improved. And general semantics, I know Bob Logan, when he gave his talk, brought up general system theory, and the very name general systems theory was coined after general semantics. Ludwig von Bertalanffy was very much referred to Alfred Korzybski, and it includes the seeds of a systems approach in general general semantics, as well as
Thank you for the general.
What's that?
Thank you for the general.
You're welcome, Bob. Thank you for interrupting.
Need a little more laughter.
Yeah. It also had played a major role in communication, in the field of communication for many years, kind of got absorbed into it, as well as in the study of media. Also very influential among computer scientists, including Alan Kay, who drew on Korzybski and McLuhan, and he's the fellow who developed the graphical user interface, which was adapted as the Macintosh and Windows operating system. So, I mean, all of this is the idea of thinking about how we represent the world and how we react to those representations, how different ways of doing that affect us. And that very much speaks to politics, because what do politicians do? They present us with sort of maps of what the world is like, but they do so in very different ways and ask us to respond in certain ways. And I think one of the big issues, one of the things we talked about in these discussions in particular, was the problem of facts, which is something that is very significant in general semantics. It comes up in Postman's work as well, when he talks about how images do not present arguments, do not make claims, cannot be determined true or false. You show a picture, it's not true or false, it is what it is. You can use it as evidence, but the claim, the argument, is made in words. So there's this understanding that not everything is a fact. What is a fact? It's a statement. It's a statement we make about the world, and then a fact specifically has to be a statement that can be proven true or false, or in the case of generalizations, at least falsified, if you follow Karl Popper. But that doesn't include any kind of opinion or judgment. To say something is good or bad, or beautiful or stupid, there's, or even hot or cool, is not something that we can objectively determine. We might all agree it's hot in here. But there might be someone in here who says, no, I'm feeling a little chilly. So,
Actually, I was going to.
you go.
Thank you.
Right, but, and that's, par for the course, but if we say that it's, whatever, 95 degrees in here, that we can sort of objectively check out and determine whether it's true or false. So, and this has become a very serious concern for us, because it seems that arguments based on facts have sort of gone out the window, at least in terms of much of our political discourse. And again, that goes back to a lot of referencing through images and a kind of imagistic representations which evoke emotions but don't speak to us in a rational manner. So that, and that also speaks to Trump's, and if you watch those videos, you find us all kind of going, how do we deal with Trump, and how do we even speak about somebody who seems to violate every rule of sane discourse? This was, Korzybski's main work, is Science and Sanity. And it is this idea of a scientific approach, not scientism in sort of like the blind worship of it, but an empirical method where we actually check reality, do reality testing, and not make assumptions about the world. That is the key to sanity. And that's where Postman, much later, published a book called Crazy Talk, Stupid Talk, which is the flip side of it. And it's sort of hard to press to say which of the two, crazy or stupid, best represents or is most often used by Trump. But that whole bit about that his opponents take him literally but not seriously, whereas his supporters take him seriously, not literally, speaks to one of the kind of issues in language that we're dealing with. We're trying to make sense of it. Other kinds of analyses have pointed to the fact that he does speak the language of sales, and that when they analyze his speech, even though there's a kind of incoherence to it, there's a tendency to use a lot of strong words, to repeat those words over and over and get across that kind of effect. And Marty also mentioned, the use of metaphor. George Lakoff, who does some very significant analysis, so that it's on the conservative side that the strict father approach is dominant, which means that it doesn't matter that there's a logically coherent set of statements. It's simply the fact that you say, I'm the authority, listen to me. So if I say one thing now and the next day say the opposite, it doesn't matter. It is the relationship that matters, not the content of the communication. And I think this has been, Lakoff is practically tearing his hair out at the fact that the Democrats have not listened to him. I mean, repeatedly ignored what he's saying about their communication, their method of communication. You can also see that on the conservative side, they've been much better at using other kinds of metaphors and other kinds of language use, whether it was like death panels for Obamacare, remember that? And things like right to life, the branding and the use of language has, and I guess that's, they have the marketing people on their side to a certain extent, but that the Democrats really have not done so well. Even words like taxes, that there are other possibilities to talk about that. Paying into a system and getting a return that helps us all, than using those terms. So, in one sense, Postman's analysis was very much about that we can't just look at language. We have to understand that we're in an image culture, and that images are overruling language, and with that, emotion overrules rationality, rational discourse. But in another sense, language still is very important, but it's a language use that we're seeing has moved very far away from the Enlightenment rationality of the founders of this nation, and that democracy depends on. I know some people have mentioned post-democracy now. But I think if there's any hope, certainly Postman was someone who looked to the Enlightenment, not to say let's go back to the 18th century and reinstitute all the nonsense from that time, but that the ideals of the Enlightenment are the things that we should cling to, and that we should move forward with that as our foundation, Enlightenment rationality. And the idea of science, again, not as something to worship or really as a constantly incomplete project that requires continual testing. That is the proper basis for for the future of the American Republic and democracy in general, and that's what is under siege. In an almost overwhelming sense. By television, by YouTube videos, by Facebook and Twitter, in the same way. If there's any hope, it has to come from educational movements. And general semantics has, since 1933, been a movement that is about educating everybody, not just in colleges, but just everybody, about their semantic reactions, which is just how we respond to this stuff that's thrown at us, And can we not be like Pavlov's dogs, salivating or coming up with knee-jerk reactions to the images and the language that we're seeing? But can we just step back, delay our responses, reflect, and analyze, and try to understand what is the best way to navigate this territory that's out there, the best map to use. Thank you.
Another generation would call chillax, right? I'm just going to do that. Let's see if we can get this over the board. See if this will run. Get a little more air. Okay, good. Thank you. And next up, Corey Anton.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the chance to talk with folks here. I'm going to try to bounce off a couple of things that both Marty and Lance said. I want to talk about semantic reactions and then the map-territory relationship as it plays out in the digital world. And I'm going to see if I can then take those concepts from general semantics and launch them into a concern that I have in the contemporary world, which I'm going to call the rise of hypocrisy over which no one cares. And then I want to talk about the work of Ernest Becker as it could potentially be fortifying general semantics. First thing, you've heard it a couple of times, people here talk about semantic reactions. I think just a really quick way to give you a taste of that is if I say the word socialist or immigrant or Republican or Muslim, you don't just hear those words and go, that's an interesting lexical entry. You have a visceral reaction to it, and it's from your conditioning, your background, your experiences. And this is what we're talking about, this map-territory relationship. We want to say that there is a territory there, and we're abstractly selecting out certain parts, omitting parts, and attuning to certain structural elements that are there. And we hope to have, maps that help us deal with the territory in more effective ways. I guess part of the question I would raise for people here today is to what extent, in a sense, with multi-ordinality, there's a sense in which I don't know if we really share a territory anymore, and that's part of the digital problem. That it's no longer different people having different maps over the same territory. It's that different people are mapping different territories, confusing those different territories as if they were one, when it's just maps upon maps upon maps. And they're sort of siloed out in these digital modes of selectively putting themselves into communities and information that already feeds the bias, the interest, and the backgrounds that they have. Now, I say this because I'm very concerned over what I just see to be an escalating rise in hypocrisy. And there's no monopoly on the left or the right. I mean, just hypocrisy, for me the simplest one is anyone who wants to claim to be pro-life but's anti-healthcare. You're not pro-life. I mean, there's a real problem there. If you want to be pro-life, be pro-health all the way down. But I think this issue of hypocrisy and why is it happening? Or take the example of Trump. Trump saying you can't believe the media, don't trust the media, and yet almost everyone who likes him, voted for him, they only know everything they know about him from the media. I mean, they're just layers of its obvious hypocrisy. And I guess I'm interested in why it's happening, and I think this is sort of the media ecological angle into some of this. And I want to read about 3 paragraphs here on this is my best guess at why it's happening. And I'd love to hear other people's sense of what's going on. I think there's probably a lot of other things. Again, this is my little map of some of this, but I'd like to hear what other people. But so we now live in the internet age, the age of camera phones, of 24/7, of constant surveillance, of Google Maps, of multiculturalism, of we live in public, of everything recorded and of political correctness. But it's also an age of pervasive anonymity, of digital stalking, of the darknet, of Bitcoin, of virtual reality, of multiple avatars, and of diminishing demands for consistency and constancy. Such fluidity is demonstrated in robust ways by Jeremy Rifkin in his book, The Age of Access. People are less committed. They're less interested in they're more interested in paying for temporary access than in owning. Today, people seem less interested in growing into solidified adults. They seem more amorphous, more perennially open to new identities. Sherry Turkle's Alone Together She recalls how the relationship between Erik Erikson and Robert J. Lifton unfolded, right? Lifton was a student of Erikson. He wrote a book called Protein Man, where he suggested, in contrast to the developmental stages recognized by Erikson, a more fluid and open-ended notion of self. When Erikson died, people could look at Erikson's personal copy of Lifton's book. We find that Erikson had crossed out all the places where the word protein man appeared and replaced them with the expression protein boy. Erikson simply could not accept the idea of adults not being firmly rooted and solidly formed. Let me give an even more focused account of this, particularly the diminishing appetites for consistency and constancy within the experience of consciousness itself. Early psychologists such as Fritz Heider, a consistency theorist in psychology, stressed that people's demand for social psychological consistency, and he noted the degree to which people are motivated to lessen dissonance when it occurs. Might he have been writing at the time of the near height of literacy? People accustomed to deep focusing upon one thing at a time? Is it not that his model, it's not that his model is not relevant anymore, but it's rather that there's less motivation for change when people's experience of relations as multiple or disjunctive or out of balance are no longer in that single frame. See, at the least, Heider's POX model, right, if people are familiar with that, it's a very, very well-known model. It gives us a way of thinking about relationships and cognitive units. The question his work naturally precipitates today revolves around multitasking, the experience of cognitively engaging in multiple acts simultaneously, and how that will impact the psychological experience of the need for consistency. Hence, we have many people who have already subjected themselves to many disjuncted yet integrated segments, what Neil Postman calls, and now this. Could it be that as people immerse themselves deeply into multitasking, they feel less of a need for the experience to be consonant? Does multitasking equip people to minimize the motivating energy for dissonance? Looking at the social scene today, it seems hard to deny that people not only tolerate multiple juxtapositions of different media palettes, they also actively seek plurality, multiplicity, and an experience of a more liquid sense of identity. If print literacy cultivates inwardness and grows appetites for constancy and consistency, the new media are fundamentally disrupting both traditional definitions of situations and of persons. People are allowing increasing degrees of role distance, a more protein self. They enjoy anonymity routinely, and they start to depend upon it. They also may have slightly alleviated the social demands for consistency and constancy of self. The more time that people spend in anonymous chat rooms, the more that they engage in surface-level interactions, the more that they have intimacy without commitment, the more that the charge of hypocrisy has no meaning. I think that's part of what's going on. Now, I bring this up because I was very concerned about hypocrisy. Many years ago, I was doing a lot of work on Bakhtin, and I saw hypocrisy to be maybe the last hope in the plurality and multicultural debates about ethics. That is, there was a huge push in the 90s where people were saying, we need to understand different cultures, different values, and said, well, in culture X, they believe, A to be the case, in culture Y, they believe B to be the case, and are these incommensurate values? And at a certain point, people went, well, maybe we can't exactly compare values, but we can at least have a buttress of, are you being true to your own values, your own morals? That hypocrisy was like the stop gag against just freewheeling all values being somehow equal. And I'm so concerned because it does seem to be that if we lose the sense of hypocrisy, and we're no longer able to level that, I'm not sure what's left for ethics in a world that's so pluralistic, so siloed out, and so, again, multicultural. I think the way that I would try to find a way out of this is through the work of Ernest Becker. In particular, there was a 1974 essay that he wrote called The Anti-Idealist Statement of Communication. I think anybody who wants to see the political scene right now, go read that essay. Send me an email, I'll send you the essay. It's about 6 pages. You will not be able to look at the debates without that affecting you. It will somehow seep under you. And so here's what he says. He says that too many people have not kept their appointment with Freud and Darwin. That's simple. That deep down people are very prone to self-deception, and it's at many layers. They can hide from themselves over what their true motivations are. And simultaneous to that, many people don't want to admit that we're animals and that we have animality as part of our being. Now, Becker Decker's not trying to suggest that democracy isn't possible. I think what he's saying is that for democracy to be actualizable, we need to begin with the open, honest, humble admittance that we lie to ourselves, we're easily self-deceived, and we have animal motivations that we don't want to admit. And he says, look, if you look out at communication and go turn on some of the political debates and ask yourself if this isn't the case. He says most communication, it's disguised power rooting and appetite sharing. If we share appetites, boy, we can understand one another. We form allegiances. Suddenly, if we don't have the same appetites, we don't share political allegiance, somehow it seems that people just can't understand those other people who don't have those shared interests. So, I mean, I guess I'll try to wrap this up with, next time you hear, and this is the application area of how the map territory, how the death fear, and how this is related to the semantic reaction. Next time you see some person who's giving some hateful speech, they're giving the white power stuff, you can't come up to this person and confront them. You can't come up and go, you're wrong, this group is equal to you. What you do is you look them in the eye and you go, do you think that you're scared of your own death and that some of this is just an overcompensation? And you just see if that can open the discussion. Because I think until people are willing to go, wow,
I take a swing at it.
I think you have to say, could it be? And you say, to what extent are all of us caught with hypocrisy and then semantically reacting to the hypocrisy? I mean, just to follow that up, Lance, I mean, when I watch the number of people who are outraged over someone else claiming that they might be racist, it's really fascinating. Because I think when you look at a lot of racism in today's culture, it looks on the outside as if it's all external and one person's being racist to another. But so much of racism has to do with the self-understanding that comes to be interjected into you from your appraisal of how others are seeing you. And it's ironic that these same people who want to say, how dare anyone think I'm racist, can't see that some of these minority groups, they don't like the way they're being seen either. That is the problem. It's happening from the inside out. It ain't just over against. Okay, thank you.
Next up, Richard Fiordo.
Senator Dirksen of Illinois had a theater background. He started one speech by having a very thick pad of paper, and he had prearranged a garbage can right next to the podium, and he threw the papers in the garbage can and said, I have a bunch of long-winded notes here, but I'd rather speak to you from the heart.
Could you speak up a little?
The interest I had in general semantics started before I met Hayakawa. I was a student in English at the Northern Illinois University. And what I found kind of interesting was nobody seemed to know what this was. I turned to my favorite English professor, a guy named Dr. Seat, whom I admired, a great grammarian. He says, oh, you want to study that? You've got to go get a degree in linguistics and then specialize in one area called semantics. It doesn't sound like, because I was reading Hayakawa's use and abuse of language. And I thought, well, I'll be polite and defer to him. And I said, I don't think we are on the same page. So when I checked, I thought, no, he had some non-general semantics notion of, I don't even know if you heard the word general semantics. You might have just heard semantics. But in my career, we got in life with it, because I started studying this around 20, maybe remember. I have seen it attacked from all kinds of angles. And then when I started studying with Hayakawa at San Francisco State, it was after looking at Elwood Murray at the University of Denver. And I forget who was at Tulane University. But I thought, oh, from Chicago, Philadelphia is too similar. Maybe Denver, and then I go to San Francisco won my heart, and I was glad I went there. But I started studying general semantics under Richard Dettering and Hayakawa, and a man named Eugene Rebstock, all very good. But Hayakawa had the fame and fortune. And studying there, I was studying with police choppers, because it was a time of great protest. So I go to class, and we'd have to be filtered going into buildings and filtered coming out. And, but it was interesting, very interesting. Then the crescendo was at the end of the first semester there, 450 people so got busted, RCMP style choke of police and thugs and so on. And they were all arrested. They would hold their ground. And it was just a comical situation and tragic at the same time. There was a lot of pain. But some of the things that Hayakawa shared, I think, were very practical. He was attacked, and I've said this before many times, for general semantics. And he said, well, at one conference, a person said, your writings on this language of thought and action are reductionistic and simplistic. And he says, yes, and that's why I'm read, and that's why I'm the book of the month, and I'm welcome. So the point is, when he was going from professor to president of San Francisco State and then into a congressional role, there were not 3 easy steps. It was a long battlefield to go there. But one of the scenes, he tore a mic that was illegally placed, and the media were covering it as the castration of the megaphone. But it was colorful. Everything was colorful. Now, the interesting thing is I took an excursion for many years. I never let go of general semantics, but I went into semiotics, and I found the practicality of general semantics pulled me back in. Sounds like a line from Godfather, right? Anyway, the analysis of media that I share with everybody who spoke before me, there are very similar things you have to learn in general semantics, some of the basic terminologies. I used the book many years after I graduated with students in Eureka College. I spent 2 years at Ronald Reagan's graduation alma mater, and the students had terrible time with the lingo. I had incorporated it into my life so many years prior. I said, what's the problem? What's this intentional orientation, extensional orientation? I used to call them the big O's. But the point is, they didn't get the concept. And I said, look, you're arguing with somebody, and the person is saying, oh no, Mount Hood is in Washington, not Oregon. And an intentionally oriented person gets lost in that kind of thing until you say, let's take out a map and we'll see. Well, you find out where is Mount Hood, pyramid-shaped beauty, Oregon side. You see it from Portland, it's beautiful. And but the intentionally minded person locks in on that and then fights you to the death. The time binding, Lance would set the pace on that topic. I always used to look at the negative side of time binding, the positive side of beneficial uses. But I was raised in a very crime-ridden area of Chicago, so I used to think, there's certain criminal activities that are also time binding. So what do you do with that? So you can talk to Dr. Strait about that. He'll explain even more. The interesting thing was recently I came across some very bizarre statements. Now, I'm not going to tell you this unless you're going to give me a little encouragement as adults, because it's social. Are you okay with this? Okay. 2 people told me this, both college graduates in their middle 50s right now, and another, they were from the New York City area. Another person recently and his wife, they were from Chicago, both college graduates, very bright. Same thing, I call it anti-Obama propaganda, because that's how, to me, the media now is a function of commentary, deciding who you're going to put in the role of prosecuting attorney and defense attorney, because I'm not getting the kind of news I was used to in the past, where it was there was an attempt to come up with something other than fake news. But this is the statement, and it's kind of surprising, and it has to do with personal attacks on Obama and Michelle. First of all, and I'm not saying this, I'm just the channel. Michelle Obama is not Michelle Obama. She's a transgender person. Another thing is, Barack Obama is homosexual. And the 2 children are not from either of them. They're from a family they adopted them from in Algiers. One went so far as to analyze Michelle's body and say, look at the length of her arms. She's tall. The usual rule that doctors, plastic surgeons, they look for hand size and foot size if there's a transgender. Not arm length. You can have long arms as a woman or a man. But anyway, and this is the kind of attack. Marty said, what do you do with judgments of this sort that you hear, statements of this sort? Well, you delay it. You delay the response to it. Now, if it were a comedy routine, I'd probably take out a seltzer bottle and spray it or slapstick. But you look at this and say, how many people have these beliefs? And if it's true, well then, give me the evidence. Let's see some evidence about this. And will it affect me personally? Probably not. That to me doesn't. But the idea that they're trying to discredit the former president is kind of shocking. If they had said the same thing about Ronald Reagan and Nancy, I would have had the same reaction, and there's the Republican conservative one. So the interesting thing, and I'll end it because we want to have some discussion, is to look at and embrace, if you haven't, general semantics. Tolerate getting used to some of the lingo and terminology. It's not that difficult, but it allows you to look at everything from philosophical statements to, no offense, Ed, but there's some graffiti written here, which I would not give to your gentle ears. Some angry student probably release some tension. But it allows you to look at everything, verbal, non-verbal, graphics, multiple maps. All you have to do is now turn to somebody in meteorology. There's a big department at UND, the University of North Dakota, in meteorology. And they have all these constantly changing maps, and they all have different names. I'm thinking, wow, you can't speak language that way, can you? But it's kind of amazing. And then the primitive maps are these ones that give a forecast for the next 3 days. So good luck with those. But the ever-changing ones, they all have extreme high-tech digital connections feeding the information to them. Maybe that's the new map for the territory. Thank you.
Thank you to all four of the presenters, and that gives us 15 minutes or so for some questions and answers here. We'll start here. Eddie?
I'm sorry, I have to know, what did you say to them? About Barack and Michelle Obama? I'm just dying to know.
Well, the first one occurred where there were some undergraduates present, and I didn't have to say anything. They said things basically, I never heard such crazy talk in my life. I'm ashamed to even say that. Well, one was very outspoken. The other three undergrads, they were all undergrads, were very quiet. And the one that happened more recently, I said, I wouldn't say this publicly unless you have a bulletproof shield in front of you. You're from Chicago. I said, you're on the south side where the murder rate is very high, so be very careful. Oh, come on now. I said, relying on the sources that I was given were preposterous. So we didn't finish. I was as polite as I could.
You're nice with me.
Hi, I have a request to all four panelists to resolve my cognitive dissonance. Half of my family voted for Trump. Of them, all are between the ages of 95 and 45. All products of print culture. All took great pains to step back and to analyze. All took Trump's expressions very literally. As in, and I'm quoting, and I apologize, it's my family, what can I do? I just live with them. He said, let's get rid of all Muslims, and I support that, because the rest of the Muslim community needs to take responsibility for what the members of the community are doing. He said, let's build the wall and deport all 11 million of illegal immigrants. I support that, not me. Support that because our family spent several years and many $1,000s on maintaining the legal status in the United States before we could get our citizenship, let alone green card. And Hillary Clinton has demonstrated her flaws and ineptitude when she had held positions in the government, and they would pull up several mistakes that were made by Hillary Clinton. So it was all very print culture. I promise my grandmother is not in anonymous chat rooms. And you telling me that it's the modern media that is messing up the minds of the people who don't take it literally. But people who supported the candidacy of the current president are products of print culture that support literally the statements he was making.
I mean, well, there's a lot to be said on other people. I mean, I think part of the, general semantics would say that, part of the difficulty is we get caught into these either-or kinds of oppositions, and sometimes it's more complicated. And that, in this case, I'm in Michigan, and so Bernie took Michigan. When Hillary got the vote, many people felt betrayed by the DNC, and they became Bernie or busters. Would your parents have voted for Bernie?
No, not, I mean, they voted for Trump.
Okay, we don't know why they voted for Trump. Now, you give those reasons.
No, and one of the reasons they did not vote for Hillary and for they were opposed to Obamacare is because we came from a socialist country. We've been fed up by socialism, and now our new country is going towards socialism. Where else am I
I
going to
can really
run?
relate. See, I can really relate to that because my parents came, and they survived both the Holocaust and had some brief period with under communism. And so my father, I remember, voted for Goldwater against Johnson. And I was very little, so I had no sense of what that meant. But so, I mean, I understand that, and that is exactly the semantic reaction that, you know, Democrat is labeled as a socialist, you get a knee-jerk reaction. I would say I question a couple of your assumptions. One is that they're products of print culture. You know, that if you're born, you know, in let's say 1950 or on, you're coming out of television culture. And I really question whether they took literally the idea of building the wall. You know, to me, I think that it really functioned as a metaphor, which meant that we know that Trump will be tough on immigration. You know, that he communicated.
Build the wall.
Well,
I'm sorry.
no, okay.
It's a
But
metaphor.
I think, you know, what it communicated was that he was the candidate who would be tough on immigration, and in contrast to other candidates. And I think it's a mistake. It was a mistake to not recognize the fact that this is an issue, and there is a concern. You know, they say, you know, even a stopped clock is right twice a day. And you know, when he said, if you can't control your borders, you don't have a country. Well, that's basic systems theory, right? You know, you need a boundary, or the system dissolves into the environment. So, you know, it wasn't. You know, there were points, and you know, that people were able to take out of that. You know, including people who wanted to see a pro-business orientation come out of that. I think, you know, one of the points we didn't bring up was the great relevance that general semantics has for journalism, and it has been incorporated into journalism curricula, and the incredible failure of journalism to know, they didn't know how to report on Trump. So how did people know, how did your relatives know about him? I suspect that they probably watched CNN or Fox or MSNBC. I mean, I think people who are older, that includes me, I mean, you know, watch a lot of the news channels. And it was Trump, Trump, Trump. And it didn't matter that a lot of the news was negative. This is, again, Lakoff said this, you know, saying this, you know, the fact is that he dominated. He dominated the discourse, he dominated the discussion. I mean, I was just saying, my God, just stop talking about it.
Look at the
Stop talking about it. Just shut up, you know. And they couldn't do it. They couldn't do it.
Also, it's not just a matter of print culture. I mean, just because they're parts of print culture doesn't mean that their thinking is that good. In terms of elementalistic thinking, so the Muslim, but the general semantics, we call it elementalistic thinking. We say the group. Your relatives were suffering from hardening of the categories.
Tell me about it.
Right, but you don't have to be print culture or social media to suffer from that. It's just a way of thinking. And so if they would be more nuanced thinkers and not just say all people are like this or people in this category are like that, but think, gee, you know, there are how many millions of Muslims, and maybe they're not saying things because they're worried about their personal safety, and maybe there are others that are saying something your parents don't know, and maybe they're watching Fox, and Fox is reporting on that group that's saying things. So it's easier just to go with this just broad generalizations they're hearing on the news. So you might want to think of that too.
Can I make one comment? One of the principles in general semantics is to say person one is not person two, item one is not item two, distinguishing. So if you had a reaction, I think Corey mentioned semantic. reaction. Socialism one is not socialism two. So I could live in a number of countries in Europe, Norway, Netherlands, I've been there comfortable, and much more socialist, well, Canada too to some extent. But, so I wouldn't, that's a semantic reaction for sure, because socialism would be panicking, instead of finding out, well, what does it involve, what did Bernie Sanders, what was he advocating? And it would be a diminutive form of something like full blast social, Soviet socialist.
He's advocating that people pay taxes. And some of Trump's followers think that somehow Trump is a great American by avoiding taxes. It's ridiculous.
We have a number of hands here. Jeremy. Jeremy.
Hi, thank you for your presentations. I'm looking at the title, General Semantics Toolkit. One of the challenges for burgeoning academic disciplines like this is how to establish yourselves as doing something distinct from other arenas, not just renaming things that are already named in another academic topic area, let's say. So my question to you would be, can you give me an example of a tool that comes out of general semantics, applicable to current situations, the ones we've been discussing, that isn't already covered, let's say, in rhetoric, propaganda studies, media studies in general, that sort of thing? Can you give me an example of a tool that is exclusively general semantics and doesn't just have another name in another one of these disciplines, or a concept or two?
Could just, before we do that, just as a point, general semantics, 1933. So
Yeah.
So it's rather the reverse,
Yes.
except for rhetoric, which has ancient roots. But most of the other areas that you're talking about took from general semantics.
Fair enough.
Rather
Let me
than
rephrase it then
How
this
about
way.
semiotics?
There's all sorts, there's a variety of fields, and I'm not talking so much historically as the quantity of interest, the academic interest or focus on the arena that you're working in. General semantics versus other ones. For example, I work on the edges of biosemiotics. Well, biosemiotic space is this challenge. It's a very much newer field. But its conference attendees, it's fairly small. And one of the challenges is, are you just renaming what's already known, or are you contributing something distinctive? So I deal with that challenge, and I'm asking you something similar.
You want to?
Well, I mean, I would just say that I think general semantics shoots for a much wider audience. It's not just an academic discipline. It's a sort of, for lack of a better term, it's a kind of praxial hygiene for sanity. It's about trying to get everyday people to think more carefully about how they're abstracting, how they're interacting with others, the assumptions that they make. So I don't think it's like other kinds of academic disciplines. Korzybski was highly multidisciplinary, and he was frustrated at the kind of disciplinary insulation that prevented robust dialogue and practical applicability.
Fair enough. Let me then suggest that the real crux of my question is whether you can suggest a tool that's precisely from general semantics.
Why don't you throw them
Well,
out?
there's several that are used.
Richard already mentioned ones.
Indexing, dating, Ronald Reagan, in one period is not Ronald Reagan, in another, Bernie Sanders, at one time is not Bernie Sanders, in another. The two-valued orientation, which is like either or thinking versus multi-valued orientation, and at least three values. Charles Morris in my study, he liked three values, but he was, of course, open to multi-value orientation as we get on the continuum. What else?
Intentionality.
Intentionality, and that's with the S, I-N-T-E and S-I-O-N-A-M. And then extensionality, always trying to verify.
You give a nice example of open questions. Really simple to understand.
But when he's talking about these things, just the way that it was used and I mean, it's not something you can do all the time, but to help your thinking, when he's saying indexing, it is to actually write with superscripts or subscripts so that, say Ronald Reagan 1901 is not Ronald, or Republican 1 is not Republican 2, right? So when we tend to say Republicans, we're saying them as if they're all the same, where we might want to define, okay, Republican 1 is an oligarch, using these other things to manipulate people. Republican 2 is a person of principle who has deeply felt religious feelings about certain things. and Republican 3 is just like a white redneck who's just pissed off about cultural change, and in this way get a more nuanced sense of things. Adding dates to things is that idea, so that I'd say certainly Donald Trump 1980 is not Donald Trump 2017, and to help keep in mind that people do change, and that and I find this a lot with scholarship, because we get these arguments, say, about McLuhan, and what McLuhan said in 1964 and 1974 can be very different and contradictory. And it's not that one is right and one is wrong. It's it's just understanding that you're bypassing if you think you're talking about the same thing.
And just one more rule.
And the one, et cetera, which the journal is named after, that technique is to put et cetera after every sentence to remind us that we've never completely said all there is to say about things. I just want to say, one of my favorite devices from Wendell Johnson is plurals. To say, not talk about the meaning of life, but let's talk about the meanings of lives. To turn things into plurals helps us to again, get away from the very high level abstracting generalization, and to think more specifically about differences. And the other one, which goes back to Whorf and the Hopi, is use verbs instead of nouns. Let's talk about doing things rather than things. So you're not really a conservative or a liberal. You may do certain actions that are sort of conserving or liberalizing, and that's a better way to think about it. So, and there are quite a few other of these, very specific tools.
E-Prime would be an example of a very robust tool. Not everyone has to.
That's a little crazy.
It's a little crazy, but I do think to get beginning students to learn how to remove verbs to be from their writing, it makes it much more active. I mean, you basically have to move to active verbs.
So what he's saying is E-Prime was an effort, and it really only works in writing because it's too hard in speaking, is to completely eliminate the verb to be in any sense, any conjugation, past, present, future, or as an assisting verb. I completely get it out there. It's actually very challenging.
Useful exercise.
But it makes writing much more active, robust. In an interesting way, in Havelock, because we talked, shows that in the diction of Homer and of oral tradition, they don't use the verb to be in the very static sense. Nothing ever just is. Things are always happening in an active way.
And general semantics also alerts you to the dangers of if the verb is. And they have a series like the is of identity creates philosophical problems. But I had the easiest time teaching general semantics to people who had journalism backgrounds or police, because you have to identify things accurately. When I took a tour of Mount St. Helens recently, and one of the things they said is that Harry Truman is buried at the bottom of the rubble, 200 and so feet below the lake. And everyone asked the same question, because they're doing it to be for interest. Well, it's a guy whose name was Harry Truman. He didn't believe when they warned him. He says, "Oh, the mountain and I are one. We're friends." Well, it wasn't as friendly as he thought. He ended up at the bottom of it.
Another really great tool is the fact inference test, which I use in classes to understand the difference between a fact and an inference. And I find universally that students are not able to recognize it. One of my favorite moments, I used one that Christine Nystrom devised, and it's like you read a little narrative paragraph and then answer questions. And one of them was, the doctor is a man named Golupsi, and it never says it's a man. And there's always women in the class who put that down as true rather than inference, right? An inference is that you don't know, right? If it just says Dr. Golupsi and it never specifies gender, then it's not true or false that the doctor is a man. It's an inference that you can make and that we don't know. And there is, I think Haney's inference tests are available on the Institute's site. I think so. They're tremendous exercises, very useful. Journalism, law. I mean, this is very important for understanding legal language, contracts. So again, I mean, general semantics was founded on pragmatic, very specific, teachable tools for getting getting control of our own reactions.
I'll make a sales pitch. We're actually selling the General Semantics Outline Survey, which lists lots of the tools, actually all the tools, and specific ways they can be, they're useful. So if you come by the table, pick one.
There's also books for Victoria.
We
Yes.
we had lots of hands up here, but I'd hate to keep us too long here. So we'll have to continue the conversations, unfortunately, informally. 4:15 in another hour, we'll meet at the Frontier for the big bus.
At the Frontier?
At the Frontier, yes, the Frontier, no, the front of the college.
California.
Yeah, where the main road comes in. If you just come, Mr.